Tonight, we travel far to the south, beyond Egypt's familiar deserts, into the rugged and fertile lands of Nubia. There, a kingdom was rising that would soon thunder northward and claim one of the most astonishing victories in ancient history. This was the kingdom of Kush, a realm forged by resilience, faith, and the ambition of warrior kings who believed they carried a divine mandate. Their mission was nothing less than to unite the fractured Nile Valley under one rule, and in the process they would become Egypt's boldest dynasty in centuries. To understand this moment, we must look back to the end of Egypt's new kingdom. Around 1070 BCE, Egypt, which had once been the wealthiest and most powerful empire of the ancient world, collapsed under the weight of internal turmoil and external threats. The last Egyptian garrisons stationed in Nubia, the land to Egypt's south, withdrew northward. With their departure, Nubia was left to govern itself, free from Egyptian control for the first time in centuries. In the absence of Egyptian authority, the local chiefs and clans of the Middle Nile began to weave their fragmented territories into something new. Slowly, they formed a kingdom centered at the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal, near Napata. This site had long been sacred to the Egyptians, who believed the god Amun dwelled there. Now, it became the spiritual and political heart of Nubia's rising power. The early Napatan period is still mysterious to historians. Written sources are scarce, but archaeology reveals fascinating clues. The people of this new Kushite state carried many Egyptian traditions forward. They worshipped Amun as their chief deity, built temples in his honor, and imitated Egyptian burial practices. Yet they were not simply imitators. Over time, distinct Nubian elements appeared in their art, their language, and their political ideology. Egypt had called their land Kush, but the Nubians themselves soon embraced this as the name of their kingdom. Legend tells us that a ruler named Alara emerged in the 770s B.C. to transform these loosely united clans into a hereditary monarchy. Later, kings revered him as a founding father. His reign was remembered as so long and prosperous that future rulers prayed to have lifespans equal to his. Alara established Napata as a royal court and religious capital. Here, Egyptian court rituals were reshaped with a Nubian identity, creating a unique hybrid culture. Under Alara, the Kushites declared Amun of Napata to be not just their local god, but lord of every foreign land. This declaration foreshadowed the expansionist ambitions that would soon propel Kushite armies northward. Alara's successor, Kashta, made the first bold move toward Egypt. Yet rather than marching north in conquest, Kashta employed diplomacy and subtle pressure. He extended Kushite influence into Upper Egypt without even drawing a sword. His troops occupied Elephantine Island near Aswan, securing a foothold inside Egypt. More importantly, Kashta arranged for his daughter, Amanirdis, to be installed as the high priestess of Amun in Thebes, a position of enormous political and religious influence. By the time Egypt's Libyan-descended dynasties in the Delta realized what was happening, Kushite power had already taken root in Upper Egypt. Through careful negotiation and family alliances, Kashta had quietly placed Egypt's spiritual heartland under Kushite control. Kashta was succeeded by his son Piye, also known as Pianki, a devout worshipper of Amun and an ambitious king. By the mid-740s BCE, Piye ruled both Kush and Upper Egypt, establishing himself as the founder of Egypt's 25th dynasty. For Piye, this was more than political strategy. It was a divine mission. He believed that he was chosen by the gods to restore order, known in Egyptian thought as Ma'at, to a land that had fallen into chaos. Lower Egypt at this time was fragmented. Local lords squabbled for dominance, while Libyan dynasts ruled parts of the Delta. Disorder threatened the unity of the Nile, and Piye saw this as a sacred calling. He proclaimed his divine mandate in grand terms on his famous victory stela. "I am the king, the living image of Atum. marked from the womb as ruler, beloved of the gods, son of Ra, whose strength none can withstand, Piye, beloved of Amun. Before he marched north, Piye ordered his soldiers to purify themselves ritually and offered sacrifices to Amun. This was no ordinary campaign. It was, in his mind, a holy war to restore the gods' will in Egypt. In his 20th regnal year, Piye launched his campaign. He first secured his base by traveling to Thebes to celebrate the great Opet festival, ensuring that the gods blessed his mission. Then, with an army of Kushite and Theban troops, he advanced into Middle Egypt. His first major target was Hermopolis, ruled by a prince named Nimlot. After a long 5-month siege, Nimlot surrendered. When Piye entered Hermopolis, he inspected Nimlot's palace and was enraged by what he found. The royal stables were neglected, the horses starving. To Piye, who valued horses as divine gifts and symbols of kingship, this neglect was intolerable. He thundered at the Egyptians' carelessness, declaring that the horses would be fed before the guilty caretakers received any mercy. This episode, carefully recorded in his stela, reveals not only Piye's strict discipline, but also his deep reverence for the animals that symbolized his rule. Meanwhile, Egypt's fractured rulers attempted to unite against him. Tefnakhteh, a powerful prince from the western delta city of Sais, rallied a coalition of delta lords to resist the Kushite invasion. They laid siege to Heracleopolis, hoping to block Piye's advance. But Piye marched north, broke the siege, and crushed the coalition forces. The Kushite king proved himself not only a devout servant of the gods, but also a formidable commander. His victories opened the road to Memphis, Egypt's ancient capital. At first, the defenders barred him from entry. Piye, unwilling to wait, stormed the city and captured it by force. With Memphis in his hands, the rest of the Delta rulers began to surrender. One by one, the local king submitted to Piye. At his headquarters, the lords of northern Egypt were brought before him. His stela depicts the remarkable scene. 3 Delta rulers, Osorkon IV of Tanis, Uput Satu of Leontopolis, and Pefjo Awibast of Heracleopolis, kneeling in submission before the Kushite conqueror. Nimlot of Hermopolis, who had already capitulated, was allowed to act as their spokesman. Yet not all were granted equal status. Those who were uncircumcised or who had eaten impure foods like fish were considered unworthy to enter the sacred presence of Piye. This detail reveals how deeply Piye framed his conquest in terms of religious purity. Tefnakhteh of Sais, the mastermind of the resistance, fled into the marshes of the western delta. Though he refused to appear before Piye, he sent a letter acknowledging the Kushite king's supremacy and swearing loyalty. Piye accepted this submission, satisfied that the rebellion was crushed. What happened next surprised many. Having conquered all of Egypt, Piye did not remain to rule from Memphis or Thebes. Instead, he withdrew to his homeland of Kush. His mission, as he saw it, was complete. He appointed the defeated rulers as governors of their own cities, leaving them in place as his vassals. From Napata, far to the south, he would reign as lord of the Nile Valley. Back at Thebes, Piye celebrated his triumph with lavish sacrifices to Amun, then returned south in glory. For the first time since the New Kingdom, Egypt and Nubia were united under one sovereign, establishing the 25th dynasty. Piye himself continued to reign from Napata until the mid-710s BCE, leaving behind a powerful legacy. On his stela, he boasted of deeds greater than his ancestors had ever achieved. He had created the mightiest Nubian empire in history. His victory was not only political, but spiritual, casting him as the chosen ruler who restored the gods' order to Egypt. When Piye died, his son, or possibly nephew, Shabaka, inherited the throne. Unlike Piye, Shabaka was determined to strengthen Kushite control over the north. He eliminated the last remnants of rival dynasties in Lower Egypt and made Memphis his royal seat. From there, he presented himself as the legitimate successor to Egypt's long line of pharaohs. Shabaka's reign marked a new chapter for the Kushite dynasty in Egypt. If Piye was the conqueror and unifier, Shabaka was the consolidator and cultural revivalist. He understood that to truly rule Egypt, it was not enough to dominate militarily. He had to embed Kushite authority within Egypt's traditions, religion, and memory. Almost immediately after taking power, Shabaka faced a world in turmoil. To the northeast, the Assyrian Empire was expanding rapidly, and their armies were marching into the Levant. Egypt's influence in this region had waned long ago, but the Kushite rulers saw the growing Assyrian presence as a direct threat. Shabaka positioned himself as both the heir to Egypt's legacy and as a protector of its allies. In 701 BCE, during the reign of the Assyrian king Sennacherib, the kingdom of Judah rebelled against Assyrian domination. The Assyrians responded with overwhelming force, laying siege to Jerusalem. In this crisis, Egyptian and Kushite forces under a young prince, Taharqa, Shabaka's relative and future successor, marched into the Levant to aid Judah. The outcome was mixed. The Assyrians claimed victory, boasting of their conquest, yet Jerusalem was never captured. The biblical account attributes this to divine intervention, describing how the angel of the Lord struck down the Assyrian army. Modern historians suggest other possibilities. Perhaps disease ravaged the Assyrian camp, or perhaps Judah offered tribute that persuaded Sennacherib to withdraw. Either way, Kushite Egypt had played a significant role in one of the most famous events of biblical history. Domestically, Shabaka devoted himself to reviving Egypt's prosperity and restoring its ancient glory. He was, like Piye, deeply devoted to Ammon and to Egyptian tradition. But he went further, seeing himself as the guardian of Egypt's cultural memory. One of the most remarkable testimonies to his reign is the Shabaka stone. This inscription tells us that Shabaka found an ancient papyrus containing a theological text from Memphis, describing the creation of the world by the god Ptah. Fearing that the fragile document would decay and vanish forever, Shabaka ordered the text to be carved into stone to preserve it for eternity. The result is one of the most important religious inscriptions in Egyptian history. Ironically, the stone was later damaged and reused as a millstone, but enough survives to provide invaluable insight. Shabaka's devotion to preservation reflected a broader trend in his reign. He sponsored temple restorations across Egypt, reviving crumbling sanctuaries and commissioning new statues, reliefs, and buildings in the traditional style. At Karnak in Thebes, he expanded the great temple of Amun and maintained the position of god as wife of Amun, filled by his sister Amunirdis, to reinforce Kushite control over Upper Egypt's religious establishment. His reign has often been described as a cultural renaissance, a rebirth of Egyptian tradition under Nubian kingship. Statues of Shabaka and his family, carved in the classic Egyptian style, have been found from Nubia to the Delta. They demonstrate not only political power but also a deep respect for Egypt's ancient identity. Yet, as Shabaka aged, the looming threat of Assyria grew stronger. He knew his successor would face an empire far larger and more ruthless than Egypt. That successor was Taharqa, the son of Piye, who took the throne in 690 BC. Taharqa was already a seasoned commander when he became king. He had led troops in the Levant during Shabaka's reign, gaining first-hand experience of the Assyrian war machine. At around 32 years old, he inherited both the glory and the peril of the Kushite dynasty's rule over Egypt. For much of his reign, Taharqa presided over a flourishing kingdom. He embarked on an ambitious program of construction, rivaling even Egypt's greatest pharaohs. At Karnak, he built a grand colonnade and a monumental kiosk dedicated to Amun. At Jebel Barkal, the Kushite holy mountain, he expanded the temple complex. He also inaugurated a new royal cemetery at Nuri, where he built the largest pyramid of the Napatan dynasty. a structure that still dominates the landscape today. Taharqa's reign embodied grandeur, but it was also overshadowed by constant warfare with Assyria. At first, he managed some successes, but eventually the Assyrians proved too powerful. King Esarhaddon of Assyria invaded Egypt, defeating Taharqa and capturing Memphis. Later, under Ashurbanipal, the Assyrians struck even harder. Thebes, Egypt's spiritual heart, was sacked and plundered. Taharqa fled south to Nubia, where he continued to rule until his death in 664 BCE. Though defeated, he remained a symbol of resistance. His monumental works endured, and his memory lived on in both Egyptian and biblical traditions. After Taharqa's death, his nephew Tantamani ascended the throne. Determined to restore Kushite rule, he launched a bold counteroffensive. He marched north, retook Memphis, and for a brief moment reunited Egypt under his crown. But Assyria was relentless. They retaliated with overwhelming force, crushing Tantamani's army and looting Thebes once again. This devastation marked the final end of Kushite control in Egypt. Tantamani retreated to Nubia, where he continued to rule as king of Kush, but the dream of ruling both Nubia and Egypt had ended. His coronation dream, in which he saw two snakes representing the two lands, proved prophetic. At first, he believed it meant he would rule both Upper and Lower Egypt. In reality, it foretold the brief unity followed by inevitable loss. Still, the kingdom of Kush endured for centuries more, thriving along the Middle Nile long after Pharaonic Egypt faded. From their capital at Napata and later at Meroe, the Kushite kings built a rich civilization of their own, one that preserved elements of Egyptian tradition while developing unique cultural forms. In fact, the kingdom of Kush would outlast Pharaonic Egypt itself, continuing well into the classical era. The story of the 25th dynasty, the dynasty of Kushite pharaohs, remains one of the most fascinating episodes in ancient history. It was a time when the balance of power shifted dramatically. Egypt, long the conqueror of Nubia, found itself ruled by Nubian kings who revitalized its traditions and momentarily restored its unity. This era reveals the fluidity of cultural identity in the ancient world. Kush was shaped by Egypt's influence, but in turn it reshaped Egypt. The Kushite rulers saw themselves not as outsiders, but as rightful heirs of the pharaonic tradition. They restored temples, honored the gods, and revived the old glories of the Nile Valley. Yet the world around them was changing. The Assyrians, and later the Persians and Greeks, would dominate the Near East. Egypt's days of empire were over. But thanks to the warrior kings of Kush, Alara, Kashta, Piye, Shabaka, Taharqa, and Tantamani, the legacy of Nubia was forever written into Egypt's history. The 25th dynasty is remembered both as a renaissance and as a final act of grandeur before Egypt's decline. It was a chapter where the conquerors became the conquered, and where two civilizations, Egyptian and Nubian, merged into a single extraordinary story along the eternal Nile.